You are listening and streaming More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte, and really delighted to welcome to the show Brandon Lamar. He is the president of the Pasadena chapter of the NAACP. And, you know, right away when I saw this news, I knew that I wanted to talk to folks who've been organizing on the ground from the very beginning to get their immediate reaction to this. Brandon is not just the president of the NAACP Pasadena chapter, he's also a documentary filmmaker who's been telling the story of Altadena since before most of the country knew its name. Brandon, welcome back to A More Perfect Union.
I believe you're talking to me, but I can't hear anything from my end of it.
Oh, okay. Well, we're going to fix that because that's essential. We're going to work on Brandon's audio, but in the meantime, we're going to go to James Farr. James Farr is also with us today. James Farr is host of Conversations Live, Altadena Forward here on KBLA. James, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Dr. Nii-Quartelai. Thank you for having me. I'm actually live right now at the headquarters of LA Fire Justice, and I just finished speaking with CEO Chris Holden, former Pasadena mayor, former California State Assembly member, and Speaker of the House, and getting his reaction to this bombshell finding in this investigation report into the causation of the January 2025 Altadena Eaton Canyon fire, which, Doc, as you know, destroyed over 9,000 structures. A total of 9 people perished in the fire, and estimated, and it's still being confirmed and tracked, over 435 people have perished in the post-fire event in deaths that are being attributed to causation of the fire, and as well as upwards of 25,000 people were displaced from their homes.
Yeah. And I really want to set the stage here because the LA County Fire Department, they released this long-awaited conclusion, and it's really significant. The department concluded that electrical arcing is an out-of-service Southern California Edison transmission tower that sparked the January 2025 Eaton fire, the fire that killed at least 19 people in Altadena, and to James' point, destroyed roughly 9,000 structures and over more than 14,000 acres. And so the report, it really gets specific. The fuel bed ignited approximately 12 seconds after the burning material was seen falling from the arcing event. I've got to ask, I think we have Brandon Lamar with us. Brandon Lamar will be joining us momentarily. But James, you have been on the ground in the beginning of this crisis, the beginning of this tragedy, really. On the human level, what was your reaction to this report today?
They're personally speaking, Dr. Nii-Quartelai, but I have to kind of conflate the two because I'm personally impacted. I've been reporting for the last 19 months on the ground since day one because I live inside of the fire zone, right? My family and I had to evacuate. And so personally, it is a bit of relief in that we now have evidenced, an independent report, documentation that, folks like you and I can put our hands on and move away from the alleged language or not quite yet verified language. But what this report does inform me is what I have said, Dr. Nii-Quartelai, on my program for the last 80 some odd weeks, is that somebody or somebody's didn't do their job. We knew that, and it didn't necessarily take a report for us to understand that there were 13 independent verified videos that Edison would have had the community to not believe their lying eyes. And so from the beginning, Edison has attempted to abscond themselves from accountability. They've attempted to deflect themselves. They've blamed, encampments, or even flirted with blaming undocumented community members as a part of perhaps an encampment that could have sparked the fire. But it's my belief and my reporting since day one, Doc, that there was no deniability that Edison was the causation of this fire. We knew that on January 7th, 8th, and we know it today for sure.
Brandon Moore, the president of the NAACP chapter in Pasadena. Brandon, I hope you can hear us.
I can hear you now.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And so what was your initial reaction to this report? As James just mentioned, to some people, it may sound like water is wet. But what did it sound like to you?
To me, my initial reaction was, tell us something new. This is something that we already knew. And now we just have a report. We have paper. We have documents to tell us what we've already known from the beginning. And I think that is sometimes what is disheartening for a community, especially in communities of color, is that we live out truths even when people don't believe the truth that we live out. And so it's sad that, a report like this had to happen, it had to happen. You can't take it away. But at the same time, this is what community have been saying all along. This is what neighbors have been saying all along. This is what people who have been impacted by this fire have said all along. And I think now that we have this truth coming into community, then we should be seeing wholeness happening within community much faster because of this, right? And so it's not only accountability, but if you have accountability without making a community whole, then you really have nothing. And so I think with this documentation, it's going to allow our community to get the accountability that is needed, so our communities can be made whole in this time.
And just as you were just laying that out, I couldn't help but wonder, what does today's fire department report actually change for families who are 18 months in the rebuilding? In some cases, folks who still can't rebuild for a whole wide variety of reasons. Does this strengthen their hand, particularly those folks who might have been considering, signing up for this Southern California Edison wildfire fund? I know there's been a lot of talk in the community about that fund and what happens in terms of people's ability to pursue any suits against Southern California Edison if they tap that fund. What are you seeing? What are you hearing related to that?
Yeah, I think a part of the accountability part of it is the lawsuit, right? And oftentimes you can't hold people accountable if you don't go through the lawsuit. And so that is one way to do it. Now, the other thing that we have to acknowledge is that this took 18 months. And not everybody had 18 months to wait. There are people who sold their lots, their grandparents who sold their lots, their children who sold their lots because they didn't have the finances either to rebuild or the finances to stay in their community. The last time I was on your show, I had mentioned that, I had just spoken to a survivor who's living in New Mexico at his parents' house. There's another survivor that I've spoken to that is living in Atlanta at his grandmother's house, because people are so stretched so far wide, not just in LA County and San Bernardino County, but this has really brought not only a mental health toll, but this is a financial strain on people, and not everybody can wait for the lawsuit to complete to make their lives whole. I think this document that came out today gives people fuel behind the fire, and hopefully allows us to speed up the process to make families whole, and to show that there is negligence that happened. And we have to work together in order to make that happen. But we have to hold who's responsible. And now we know Edison, which we've been knowing, we have to hold them accountable to it. And whether that be the lawsuit or other ways, I think those are the real conversations that we have to have. I think also on the other side of it, Edison, who is not going anywhere, has to have a real honest conversation about their infrastructure and a real honest conversation about, you know, what they are paying their members in bonuses, who actually are getting millions of dollars in bonuses on the backs of the pain of our community. Now, if you do your job, then you deserve that bonus. But literally, if you destroyed an entire community, then that's something has to give behind that, right? And I believe in working together, and I believe that we have to bring our community together. And once again, Edison ain't going nowhere. But even though they're not going anywhere, we still have to have a sense of accountability within this fight.
I just want to double click on what you just raised, because it did cross my mind as I was reading the Associated Press story about the report from the LA Fire Department today, and it made me go back and look at an article that's published in the New York Times on February 18th. The headline read, "Edison will reduce executive bonuses as a result of the Eaton fire." A half dozen senior executives at Southern California Edison and its parent company, they reported, will lose an estimated $2 million in bonuses as a result of the devastating Eaton fire. Is that enough?
To be honest, no. And I'll say it like this, you know, accountability looks different to everybody. But $2 million is not enough, especially when the president of Edison International received over $10 million. I don't know the exact number, but he received over $10 million in bonuses just on last year alone. And so, you know, within that fight, it's understanding that, you know, you can't say you want accountability, but then turn your back on community at the same time. And so I don't think it's enough. I think that there's more that can be done, especially when there's projected billions of dollars of damages that has happened in our community, and understanding the toll that it has taken in our community, and the heartstrings that it is presented in our community. And people are still fighting every single day, right? I celebrated one of our community members who goes to my church. He just moved into his home 2 weeks ago, and literally his next door neighbors are living in a tent and in their cars, right next door to his house. So in one way, we have a celebration. On the other side of it, we still see the despair and the tragedy behind what is taking place within our community. And I think those are the hard conversations that we really have to adjust. But this part allows us to see it in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. There are folks out there that say that what's happening in Altadena is a part of a pattern nationally, particularly a pattern related to Black communities that are bearing disproportionate exposure to environmental risk and infrastructure risk. Do you think the Eaton fire fits that pattern, or is this its own story?
I believe it fits the pattern behind it. You know, I've said that, you know, disasters don't discriminate, recovery does. And we've seen it not only in the span of, you know, we're talking about this report that the LA Fire Department has done, but I think that there has to be some accountability within our fire department as well. When you see fire hydrants that are not working, water that is not in the fire hydrant, so you can't even put out a fire without any water. And then even the response that have came out of the amount of county fire trucks that was in Alteen to fight the fires, right? Like there are literally things that we're seeing across the board that are injustices to our community as the Black community, African American community, community of color. But we've seen this in every single disaster. You also see this in the response to disasters, right? When you look at disasters that is happening, predominantly in African American communities, you also see who's able to come back. And the majority of Black communities are never able to come back as a whole when it comes to after the disasters. And so this is what is shaping our communities. It's what's shaping our national community. And I think that's something that we really have to pay more attention to in the Black community, especially because disasters are not going anywhere. You know, they're going to continue to happen. Climate change is here, and we're fighting a battle that we really have to work together to really overcome.
When we come forward, we'll be joined again by James Farr. He is the host of our KBLA weekend show, Conversations Live, Altadena Forward. I'm curious about what your message is for displaced Altadena families that are listening or streaming right now. When we come forward, I want to give you an opportunity to share what they need to know about this report, the bellwether trials, and the claims process. You're listening to and streaming a More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. More with Brandon Lamar of the Pasadena chapter of the NAACP and our very own James Farr. You are listening to and streaming a More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte, and really honored to be in conversation with my colleague James Farr. He is the host of Altadena Rising, of Conversations Live, Altadena Forward, right here on KBLA Talk 1580. And Brandon Lamar, who is the president of the Pasadena chapter of the NAACP. These gentlemen have been on the ground from the beginning. I mean, hat tip. I got my hat on today. Hat tip to both of you for just your commitment, your work, and your witness. I know that a lot of it is not very glamorous, and I know it's oftentimes not easy, but you all have really stuck with the recovery and accountability efforts, and we are most grateful to both of you for being here. We've been talking about this this report from the LA Fire Department about the Eaton fire, an 18-month investigation that is basically saying what so many folks in the community have believed to be the case. The LA County Fire Department report, it's concluded that CAL FIRE's parallel investigation status should be described as ongoing. But they've said, hey, Southern California Edison, their equipment failed and caused this fire, which led to loss of life and property and all of that. Before the break, I was raising the question around the relevance of this to displaced Altadena families that are listening right now, that are streaming right now. What is it that they need to know about this report, about the bellwether trials, and the claims process?
Sure. I will first address the bellwether trials, right, and inform the audience. First of all, I'm not a lawyer, not an attorney, but what a bellwether trial is, when you have an action similar like this, where there are going to be multiple plaintiffs who likely have a similar claim, right, a similar complaint against the defendant, right? So what happens is, rather than thousands of individual jury trials happening, they kind of take a sampling of those claims and then kind of run them through a trial, and then that informs the disposition of the additional complaints. This typically happens as a preventative measure that kind of leads towards the conversation around settlement. I don't want to get too far ahead of that conversation just yet, but that does inform what the bellwether means. And so, simply put, not everyone will have their individual case in court, but there will be a collective case should the trial be late January. As far as it relates to Southern California wildfire compensation that they've touted rolled out, it won't have much of an impact on how they administer that fund. That's not the architect with the intent.
We're having a little bit of issue with your audio, James, but Brandon, I want to ask you about just the utility regulation landscape. We know that utility regulation, it's one of those issues that it crosses party lines depending on the state. And if you have 5 minutes with a California utility regulator from either party, what's the one policy change that the NAACP is demanding, or that folks in your coalition are demanding?
Yeah, so one thing that we have to really understand about this fire is that the transmitter that caused this fire actually was a transmitter that was not in use. And it has not been in use for some time now, right? The other thing that is important is that we can change this with policy change. Senator Sashane Perez actually brought to the floor a policy that will force utility companies to take down transmitters that they're no longer using, take down transmitter that no longer is in operation, that they're no longer using, and it got vetoed in Sacramento. Right? This is one of the things that we are seeing in our community is uh policies that will actually protect communities, not only communities of color, but everyone. It will protect all of us in these things, and they get vetoed because of the power that utility companies have within Sacramento or within Washington D.C. Right, and so we can talk about policies all day long, but we also have to talk about the powers that be when it comes to utility companies, and how they give to politicians in their campaigns and things of that nature, which is causing our local communities to actually suffer long term. So if that was actually something that we could have passed last year, we would have seen transmitters that are not being used across the state being taken away. But being that that was one of the things that caused our fire, or the thing that caused our fire here at Eaton, it really brings a toll in what our community needs to see change within.
James, I think you can hear us well now.
I can, Doc. Yeah, it's a busy day.
That's right. It is a busy day. Mercury's in retrograde. We're gonna fight back. That's all right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we were just talking about just sort of the regulatory, landscape. What are you hearing as we're getting closer to the November election? We know that Steve Hilton and Javier Becerra are running for governor. A lot of folks are running for a lot of offices that are going to be really important to the recovery of Altadena, whether we're talking about California Attorney General or talking about California Insurance Commissioner. Have there been any promises made to the people of Altadena as we're heading into November that our leaders, learners, and listeners might want to reflect on before they get their ballot?
Sure. Let me qualify that, Doc, as someone on the ground who has been reporting this from day one. I have not been informed of any promises from either candidate, and that's telling, not so much in the sense that I don't know of any promises. What that really speaks louder to is their absence from this community during this election time. And so there is a concern that the attention prior to getting through the primaries to get into the general election in November, we can anticipate that there'll be a flood of promises that will come into the community between now and election. The question always is, Doc, are those promises made and promises kept? Outgoing Governor Gavin Newsom promised $2.5 billion in relief shortly after the fire. No strings attached. Where's the money at, Governor Newsom? Those are the questions that people are asking. Right now, people don't want promises. They don't want a promissory note. They don't want debt. What they want is the resources to put a shovel in the ground. The need is moving and evolving forward into more of, the community needs, that is, the resources to start rebuilding, not more workshops, not more giveaways, not more philanthropic charity. All those things are received well, but what folks need now, Doc, plain and simple, is a direct deposit so that they can direct that to a contractor to get their lives back moving forward.
Brandon, as we are about to enter the final stretch of this election cycle, you know, and I know that after Labor Day, it's on and popping between September and Election Day. Uh, what do you want our leaders, learners, and listeners to ask of these candidates that are running for these offices that matter when it comes to the recovery in places like Altadena and the Palisades? You know, what are some of the key questions we need to be asking and considering before we cast our votes in November?
Yeah, I think before I tap into that, I want to say that Governor Newsom did sign the bill for $2.5 billion, and it was shown that he did not spend half of that money, which then they returned it back into the state's budget, and so it was allocated towards the recovery. It was not spent, and so was sent back into the state budget, and so I do want to put that out there. And that has to be some accountability to that. We need to know where it is. Going back to your question, though, when it comes to November, I think the thing that we really have to see is on the side of accountability. We keep talking about accountability. Things keep happening within our community without no accountability. And I think that's what we really have to see for number one. Our insurance commissioner, right? State Farm was held accountable and to a certain extent where they were fined $4 million, right? But we understand that State Farm is not the only insurance agency who has done fire victims wrong, especially in the Eaton fire. And so there has to be more accountability between our state, our people who are paying their premiums, and these insurance companies. And there has to be faster payouts. There are still people right now who have been impacted by this fire who paid their premiums on time for years, who have still not received their insurance money. And so I think that has to be more accountability within that space of it. We also need more accountability when you talk about the governor's seat. We need more accountability when it comes to the budget, not just putting things in a budget that affects you and your departments, but things that affects our community. And to see that $2.5 billion was actually not promised, but $2.5 billion was given and signed to our community, but it was not spent the way it was supposed to be spent. That means it's still there somewhere. And so we have to have accountability within those stances of it. At the end of the day, what I always say is that when it comes to disasters don't look at if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. Disaster hits everyone, and so disasters are not a political issue. It is a humanitarian issue. And so at the end of the day, we need to make sure that people are actually able to come back home and be made whole, no matter what policies are there. I think the last thing that I'll say, and I'll leave it here when it comes to this, is aside from policies, we need to make sure that some of these people that are in office, if not all these people that are coming into office, that they are hiring people that look like what our communities look like. And that is not the case most times. And so when we're looking at this and we're advocating and we're pushing for these things, we need to make sure that our communities are being hired within these positions, because that's when true accountability and connection happens.
Speaking of true accountability and connection, the story of what continues to transpire in Altadena is not just unique to Altadena. It may be coming to a community near you. James, hundreds of miles north of us in Spokane, Washington, they're going through something that will look painfully familiar to you. Wildfires that began Saturday have forced the evacuation of roughly 65,000 people in the Spokane area, with 3 blazes collectively called the Spokane Complex Fire, burning over 8,000 acres. Spokane County Fire District 3 chief said that 640 structures were destroyed in the Old Trails fire alone. There's also another troubling development. A man has been charged with arson in connection with the Old Trails, and that suspect reportedly had a prior manslaughter conviction. One resident's words captured saying, "Nothing has sunk in yet. I'm still processing it." And our hearts go out to to everyone there in Washington that are absorbing the shock of this. But James, as someone who lived through Eaton, what's the first thing you noticed in the Spokane coverage that may have took you right back to January 2025?
Just the sheer terror in people's faces, right? The concern in the immediacy, right? I think I have a different discernment for this 1,000-yard stare that kind of envelops a person when they're facing such a tragedy. While that alleged is to believe to be caused by an arsonist, I think it's important that we separate the Eaton Canyon fire as corporate negligence, right? That actually coincide with a natural wind act, right? These winds blowing on January 7th were essentially a hurricane without rain. And I don't think that is a description that the audience has in understanding just how these flames were blowing like a blowtorch. So my heart goes out to the folks up in the state of Washington. I know folks here can understand, and we hope that they get the same justice they are seeking that many of the community members right here in Altadena are seeking, which is just simply accountability. The difference is a criminal prosecution looks much differently than a multi-corporate, billion-dollar conglomerate absconding themselves from responsibility and blaming it on the very people and community that they burned out.
Brandon, in our remaining minutes, Spokane and Altadena are very different demographically. I've got to ask you this question straight up. Does the disaster response and the national attention, you suspect it's going to look different because of who lives there?
The truth of the matter is, I don't know. Every disaster since the Eaton fire has not actually received FEMA dollars as they should have under this administration. And that's all the way from, Missouri to Texas and everywhere else that you've seen. We have not seen the response from FEMA as we have seen before this administration got back into office. And so I think that's the concern that we have right now. I think the other thing that we have to really push on our communities is that we really have to start pushing our communities to really prepare for disasters before they strike. We cannot wait and say, well, that's not going to happen to us, because we've always said it until it did happen to us. And so I think one thing that we really have to push for, and going back to your point about this November election, is that we have to put people in office that's going to push for these FEMA dollars, these dollars to get into the hands of our community members and to the people who are affected the most by disasters. At the same time, if we're not able to rebuild, our communities won't be diverse. And I think that's the part that we have to continue to understand, is that, yes, you can write people a check, but if it's not a check to make them whole and to make them rebuild, then nothing really matters to that point.
Brother Brandon, Brother James, thank you for joining us. Our hearts stay with, of course, the people in Spokane, the way that they've stayed with the folks in Altadena. When we come forward, our final story of the day, ICE ankle monitors and the end of protection for thousands of Haitian families. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. More when we come forward.